Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Brent Tolner. I'm the Senior Director of National Programs for Best Friends Animal Society. I want to thank you for coming for our first ever COVID Town Hall. This is something that we do plan to do, probably a few more versions of this in the future, just as things change and the ever-changing world that we're in right now, to continue to be a resource for you all to ask your questions and hopefully be able to provide some thoughts and ideas from you all, for you all as you go through all of the challenges that are taking place. I want to give everybody just kind of a lay of the land on this a bit. Everyone is muted, so the only people that will be able that you'll hear from alive and in person are me as the host of the event and our four panelists, who I'll get to here in a bit. But if you all have questions, please go over into the chat box on the right and go ahead and ask your questions over there. You can just type them in, and then we will get to as many of those as we possibly can. This is a pretty big turnout today, so we may more than likely won't get to all of the questions, but know that we'll do our best to get to most of them live, and then if we don't get to the live questions, then we will get to a response back to you after this event is over. Also, do note that due to some technology glitches on this, not all of the questions that you submit will be published. Some of them we'll be able to see on the back end of things, but they don't necessarily all get published. So just know that that's an issue too. So don't panic if you don't see your question come up on the published event. We more than likely can see it. You just probably won't be able to see it on your side of things. So with that, I would like to introduce our four panelists. Sue Cosby, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Sue Cosby, the Senior Director of Lifesaving Centers for Best Friends Animal Society, and I help provide leadership for Best Friends brick and mortar facilities that include our location in New York City, Atlanta, Salt Lake City, Los Angeles, and the sanctuary here in Utah, where I'm located, as well as the two new center locations that are in the process of getting off the ground now, which include Houston and Bentonville, Arkansas. And my history is in animal control sheltering and private limited admission sheltering. I have a little bit of experience of running all of those things, including some pretty large spay and neuter operations as a part of those organizations.
Makena.
Hello, Brent. So I am one of the regional directors for Best Friends Animal Society. I have two regions. I've got the Mid-Atlantic area, which is Maryland, all the way down to North Carolina and over to Tennessee and Kentucky. And then I also have the Southeast region, which is South Carolina all the way down to Florida, and it includes Mississippi and Alabama. So really great states there. My history is I started in the field in 2000, very long time ago, and I've been involved with 3 different organizations and run many different kinds of shelters. And my last shelter was the Lynchburg Humane Society, where I was executive director for 9 years.
Bethany Heins.
Hi guys, I'm Bethany Heins, the Director of Operations and Strategic Projects for Best Friends. And in my current role on Brent's team, I have the opportunity to work with our partners and potential partners all across the country. I'm super excited to be chatting with you guys this evening. A little about my history, also some diverse background, mainly in shelter operations. I've been everything from a kennel attendant to an executive director. I've worked for large municipal shelters and very tiny 501c3s that contract to provide services.
And Michelle Dosson.
Hi guys, I'm the director of the Norfolk Animal Care Center down in Norfolk, Virginia. My background is largely in municipal sheltering, starting about 15 years ago. Everything much like Bethany, from animal care to a long-term position as an animal protection officer, humane educator, and then also a brief stint, a couple of years with Best Friends Animal Society with their shelter outreach team, where I had the opportunity to work with many organizations across the country. And so now this is my first time in a director position, and I'm super excited.
And it's a director position you've been in for what, 3 months now?
Just over 1 month actually. I hit my 1 month last week.
Wow, so brand new and right into the feet of the fire.
Right.
So yeah, so as we go through the questions, we're going to have a couple of key topics before we get to your all's questions that are going to center around 3 kind of key topics. Really, one is creative solutions for life-saving when your shelter is closed or some type of modified open. I know a lot of different folks are in different states of being closed due to stay-at-home orders and whether or not they're considered an emergency service. So we're going to talk about some creative solutions that are going on out there. Solutions for leveraging like your operations just with minimal staff and volunteers because some people have staff that are now sick and staying at home or aren't able to get to work for whatever reason, and we want to be sure to talk a little bit about that. And then also how organizations are supporting each other. We'll talk a little bit about those 3 main topics, and then we'll get into your all's questions. So with that, I'm going to start with you, Sue. You know, the past couple of weeks have been pretty weird, and just tell us a little bit about how things have been like for you and the shelters that you work with Best Friends. You know, what is being done to make progress in getting animals out of the shelter safely?
Yeah, it's been really weird, to say the least, in that this, unlike regular disasters that any of us might have experienced or been a part of in the past, it's happening nationally. Which is scary because it's not like other areas of the country can actually come in and help right now. It's really affecting everyone. So for everyone out there, what I can say is you are not alone. And if you're not really feeling the effects of this yet, what you can do is look to the places where things are really in a crisis now, and look at those shelters and look at those communities to see what's happening there as a preview of what may happen in your community. And we can hope that it actually doesn't happen in your community, but it's a really good opportunity for you to see what's going on and look what's happening. For us, you know, we do have a Lifesaving Center in New York, and I would say that that being the center of gravity for this outbreak of disease in our country has been in New York, is where we started to see the most dramatic community changes first. And while we were seeing those dramatic community changes happen first there, places like our Arkansas Center and Atlanta Center, they weren't seeing the same kind of impacts, but being able to view what's happening across the country and other locations really helped plan for it. So an example of some of the things that we had worked on were setting up adoptions by appointment. But even within the same week that we had adoptions by appointment, we realized that with what was happening in places where this was becoming a crisis, having any public in our facility was probably going to be unwise going forward. So we started making plans on how to limit the public into our facility. If you have a facility and you haven't started doing that already, I would encourage you to do that right away. Because in one location, we made that plan, they finalized their plan on a morning anticipating to close to the public by the weekend. They received an order from their locality that they had to close as of that night. Luckily, they were ready to go.
That's awesome. Michelle, tell us a little bit about how the last couple of weeks have been for you after, you know, being able to settle into your job for 2 weeks and then jumping right into this. So tell us a little bit about your all's journey.
Yeah, for us at the Norfolk Animal Care Center, I found that, you know, the staff were a bit panicked at first when, you know, the city made the decision to close all city business. But I got some good advice from many people, and they all had the same message. You know, when you go in there and you're a new director, you need to be making a strategic plan, and that would help with staff buy-in and, you know, lessen the panic of a new director coming in. But I really didn't have a big plan for a potential pandemic coming out. So when that happened, I just went, you know, looked back on the advice I was given and kind of came up with a plan. And it was a written plan that I had by the next morning. So our city manager closed us one on a Thursday night, announced our closure on a Thursday night, I should say. And we had a few days, literally Friday, Saturday, Sunday, to come up with what we were going to do. So writing that plan down and meeting with staff every single day to debrief, giving them time to ask questions, and in many cases give really good suggestions on what our plan was for that day. It kind of settled the panicked mood. We came up with a plan to get as many animals out within the 3 days, and that included a press release with a foster plea and our first ever fully subsidized adoption promotion. And going back to what Sue said, really learning from what other jurisdictions had already gone through, I borrowed in air quotes there, Gateway Pet Guardians press release. They had a really great one. And so Jamie sent it to me and I just tailored it to our needs and we got it out. And we were really lucky to have it picked up by multiple media outlets. So we did that. It was really successful. We got every animal out that was available to leave, and we had foster backups for all the rest of the animals that were already there. The community stepped up like we've never seen them step up before. And I've been told by people who have been in this community before that they've never really been told what they needed to do and how they could help. So just being really clear and transparent about what we needed, and they showed up. It was incredible. So if I had to say, what I've noticed, we've had a bunch of changes over the last couple of weeks, and I know that being a new director coming in, that's a major change for them already, and then they're going through major changes again 2 or 3 times within a couple of weeks. But I've really focused and prioritized the clear communication organization-wide. That's also written down and available to everybody. We've printed it out. It's on our shared drive. And the staff know that they have an opportunity to give suggestions on how we can improve. We were closed for about a week without adoptions, and since we were doing so well with the city mandated plan, we just kind of came up with a virtual adoptions plan and pitched it to our city manager, and they are letting us do that now. So I think having a plan in place, really thinking it through, and then doing what you're mandated to do well, and then asking for more and more. I think that's worked for us, and I'm lucky to have a very supportive executive boss. So.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about your virtual adoption program.
Well, we just created it last Friday, and it just takes a little bit of organization on the back end. Reallocation of staff, so we now have extra staff available to be available at phones for over the phone adoption counseling, having those conversations of like what animal, making right matching choices. And people are able to pay over the phone. We also created their first ever adoption application, so to speak, just that questionnaire that people can mail in telling us which animal is they're interested in. And it's all done virtually. If people aren't able to mail it in or email it in, we're not on a city or state mandate shelter in place yet. So people are still able to drive up and talk to customer service through the glass. Nobody's allowed in our building, but they can call the number and they can talk through the glass and tell us which animal they're interested in. We go so far as to, FaceTiming with people, going back into the kennels, having virtual meet and greets. We have videos on deck of all the animals that are on our website, which is every single animal, just in case somebody's interested in them, and so we can email that to them. And recently we are able to conduct meet and greets for those dogs that are special cases, that where we absolutely need that person to come in and meet them, or they need to come in and meet that animal. We're able to do that in an outside play area with safety precautions, so distancing precautions, and a full sanitation of the area, like the gate and everything before and after.
That's great. And I love how both you and Sue mentioned like just borrowing ideas from other people who may be further down the road in this process than others. And also the idea that even though people aren't allowed necessarily in your buildings, that life-saving programs are still possible. So Bethany, you oversee a lot of our network communications. What are you seeing from some of our partners out there in terms of life-saving and what's going on out there?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the most successful things that we're seeing across the board is really good communication. So regardless of the impact to your organization, whether your business as usual, whether you're a brick and mortar facility that's now been forced to close or not considered essential services, regardless of what's going on in your situation, successful programs are talking to their community about it. They're using social media, they're doing press releases, they're sending emails to their constituents and their email base. So even if you don't have all of the answers, making sure that you're letting your community know that is the first thing in continuing successful life saving. The second part of it, I think, like Michelle and Sue spoke so well to this, it's really about thinking outside of the box. Just because you're closed does not mean life saving stops. It just means it may look different than what you've done before. So step outside of your traditional programs and really think about, how can I do this differently? If you're an organization that's never done fostering before, now is a great time to start. If you're an organization that traditionally has had a little bit more arduous adoption application process, now is a great time to reevaluate that. And think about forward moving things. There's been a huge and beautiful push to get thousands of animals into foster homes in a very short period of time. And that's fabulous. Now we have to think about, how do we steward those foster homes to keep them engaged while people are still working from home? And equally importantly, how do we get our pets that are now in foster adopted from those foster homes? So as we start to open our facilities back up, that inventory, so to speak, of animals has already found a permanent placement. Yeah.
Awesome. And Makena, I know you work side by side with a lot of partners out there in your regional work. What are some of the things that you're seeing from them from a life-saving programming perspective?
You know, what I find, like what Bethany was saying, what I find the most fascinating is just how quickly and how much these organizations adapted and were forced to change their programs and do things differently. And they did it so quickly. Like within a week, we had major organizations changing how they do adoptions. I mean, technology has been a huge lifesaver in this whole process. Things from Zoom to FaceTime to online forms, you know, waiting list programs to regulate how many pets are coming in or people are coming in at a given time into shelters. Some of the great programs and things that we're seeing in the region and across the country are all very similar to what Michelle said, was a lot of these virtual adoptions that are happening. One comes to mind is the SPCA of Wake County, North Carolina. They did a whole home adoption network TV show that every 2 p.m. every day they would FaceTime their shelter, show their animals, highlight who the different animals are, what their personalities are, interact with the community by taking questions. And then people could sign up to have a personal person call them and do one-on-one conversations over the phone or fill out a form online. And as Bethany said, there's been so many organizations that have never fostered before that are now, in a sense, having to get their animals out of their shelter. And a lot of states, a good example is Georgia and Colorado, they have certain requirements that you have to do meet and greets, or you have to go to the person's home and do home visits, or background checks in some cases. And what we're seeing in Georgia is a lot of these organizations are doing virtual home tours. You can come in with a video of your home and your address, or we can, FaceTime you and walk through your house with you. So it's been really amazing to see how much technology has just been such a major player in the last week or two. Front Street, California, they took it a step further. They started delivering animals to people's homes for foster or for adoption. Kern County was one of the first that I saw on Facebook in California that were doing Facebook Live, communicating to the public about their foster program and how people could just drive up and drive away with a new pet for their home. So there's been some really cool things happening during this time.
And I believe Detroit also did like a cuddle shuttle, which I thought was a really fun title for something. So it's been really cool to see a lot of those things that are out there. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about staffing. Sue, now that the Best Friends shelters are, pretty well closed, most of them are pretty well closed to the public because of mandated shutdowns from the communities. How are you handling the staff to be sure that you're keeping them safe and still caring for the animals in the facility? And how are volunteers fitting into any of this, or are they at all?
Yeah, so closing to the public is something that we took really seriously even before there were mandates to close businesses. And even though we are in most of the places, actually all of the places where we are, we either specifically carved out as an essential service for providing services to animals, or we're not, we're mentioned under the nonprofit services. So if anyone has shutdown orders in their state, I think we're going to talk about that a little bit on how you can look at those to make sure that your work is clear under those circumstances. But closing to the public was really about doing our part to keep our staff safe and our volunteers safe, so that we weren't faced with a crisis where we would have a lot of our staff getting sick all at once, and doing our part to what everyone's talking about around flattening the curve. And we took that seriously because all of you on this call probably feel it yourselves, that there is a lot of anxiety and concern about what the future is like. That can be for your own health, that could be for your family members, that could be for some people job security for you or your family. That can also be just around what is going to happen in the future for the animals. I've seen questions come up already around spay neuter, and we'll talk about that as well. But feeling that anxiety is totally natural. So the things that you have within your control to keep your staff safe are really important that you take those actions now if you haven't already. So we did a lot of stuff like separating out teams of people. So whether they worked in different areas, worked in different buildings, created an A-B team so that one team worked completely separate from the other on separate days and didn't interact, so that if we did get someone sick on, let's say, the A team, we knew the B team would still be strong and wouldn't have been come in direct contact with them. We really took disinfecting surfaces and everything else seriously, and we made sure all the managers understood that it was their job to keep the staff safe, and our leaders knew it was their job to help recognize that people were concerned, and we couldn't dismiss it. And so being able to communicate what we were doing to keep people safe, why we were making decisions to close, why and in what circumstances we were making decisions to continue to interact with foster parents or adopters, and even in those interactions, how we were working to keep people safe. That helped allay concerns. On the flip side, all of you are going to probably experience the staff that feels like they're bulletproof, and they come in when they're still sneezing and sniffling and other. It's going to be your job to tell them it's okay, we got this. We would rather you go home now and get better than get everybody else here sick right now, whether it's even just the flu or a cold. Let's do our jobs to keep each other healthy as teams. So acknowledging that emotional part of it is big, and then doing the tools, the training, and the communication, as you pointed out, I forget who mentioned that, that is really important. I think it was Michelle. Communication is super key. What we're doing, why, and how to help them do it. Oh, I didn't mention volunteers. There's a lot of organizations that really depend on volunteers, and I think in this stage of the game, you need to treat them in the same way you treat staff, with that same level of communication, understanding that they have anxiety, doing everything you can to support them staying safe. Don't putting demands on them that at this time are just too much for them, and don't and telling them to slow down if they're coming in and doing too much, that is actually putting your entire organization at risk.
That's great. Michelle, you talked a little bit about some of the things that you're doing now that you're doing more of the virtual adoptions to keep staff safe. Is there anything, other things you want to add about how you're handling staffing during this time, or volunteers?
Well, yeah, we're not allowed to have volunteers in the building at all, which is heartbreaking because our volunteers are the best volunteers ever. But they also make up for an incredibly big part of our workforce, like 20 to 50%, depending on the day. So the majority of which was in cleaning and enrichment, really, really fundamentally important parts of sheltering. So knowing that we'd be even more understaffed than we already are, we really balanced out staffing across the division for each day. So we made sure that everybody is getting cross-trained. And in addition to that, I made sure that when I came a month ago, we only had 2 SOPs written down. That's great, it's a great start, but in this last week, I've been really leaning on my management team, and they have, I'm very proud of them, they've gotten over 60 written protocols written down in our shared drive in a way that anybody who was new to that program could go in and read them and figure out what they need to do for whatever program, whatever department they're working in. So making sure that we wrote those down, and beyond like the PPEs and sanitizer and disinfecting, daily talks about all of those things. We've implemented some new intake procedures, and we're working on a special one for animals that have come in with from known COVID, confirmed COVID households. I think that American Pets Alive put out a really incredible written procedure on that. So we're implementing that. And we're also working closely with animal protection and quite eagerly waiting for NACA to come out with their statement on field intake from those same known COVID households. We're continuing to communicate with all of our stakeholders. The same communication that goes out to staff goes out to all of our stakeholders, including our volunteer group, and we're really trying to incorporate them more virtually through the Facebook group where we can all share. So it's like staff and volunteers. I think it's really important just to let them know that they're part of our family and that we miss them, because I know they miss us. I wanted to also say, keeping staff up to date with daily factual information that's coming out from all these incredible national organizations that I was having to go into different Facebook groups and grab. But recently, we actually, it's the second day now, they have the Animal Welfare Daily Digest that comes out, which is incredible. So just publishing that to the staff and downloading that to our share drive so it's there and available for people to actually read up on what is the latest in animal sheltering in relating to this COVID pandemic. We're gonna move into like some of the marketing and fun videos that we're seeing around on social media. Sharing is caring. I always say that I'm always borrowing ideas from other organizations and to keep staff morale up, and I think we're gonna try and do some of those this week. Yeah, so it's difficult. I hear the staff, they're struggling with it sometimes, but I know that they want to be there for the animals and they're doing such a great job at it. So, yeah.
That's awesome. I love how both of you put an emphasis on just clear communication across your communities, your staff, and your volunteers throughout that process, and how important that all is. Bethany, Makena, anything that you all are seeing from partners or in your region that you want to share?
I'll jump in real quick. What we're seeing a lot of organizations shut down their spay neuter clinics, unfortunately. And so they're starting to readjust what people's roles are. So sometimes we're seeing their intake staff are helping with the adoption process or the delivery service. And one organization who's using their clinic spay neuter staff to help with their foster providers because they jumped in foster homes by like 500%. It's been crazy for them. So they had to start looking at using their staff to help support some of the new roles that have started to develop. So it's been kind of cool how they've been doing a lot of cross training and how everyone's jumping in to help.
This is Bethany. I would just add to that and to echo what the three of you guys just said. There's great resources on our Network COVID in our Network COVID resource library that helps with some of that cross training. So if you have someone who typically, works in IT and you need them to help with animal caregiving, there's resources to help them with stuff like that. And then if you have volunteers that you can't repurpose for whatever reason and you still want to keep them engaged, we're seeing organizations do that extra communications, emailing them, checking in, doing phone calls, using volunteers to do phone calls with other volunteers. Additionally, Best Friends has on our COVID-19 resource library site a lot of online learning modules. So this is a great time to kind of repurpose some of those volunteers and have them learn new things to stay engaged with your organization.
That's great. Michelle, I'm going to come back to you really quickly. And I know one of the things that is always important in times of crisis is working together. And I know that you were able to actually help support one of the local shelters in your community with increased foster homes when you had such a great reply for fosters. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. And actually, it was for adoptions because we had so many people come through our shelter that first weekend with our adoption promotion as well. So we collected over 100 foster applications over 2 days, and all those animals in our shelter had foster backups. Like, we prioritized adoptions and then had a late night, Sunday night foster pickup, just in case, because we wanted them to go to their homes before we wanted to keep our foster homes. But we realized on the second day of adoptions that we were going to run out of available animals. And even though the staff had been there for like 12 hours, they were game. When I messaged Peninsula Regional Animal Shelter on Facebook late night Saturday, and I don't know anybody here yet, so it was incredible that I got a response right away. I was, hey, what do you guys have? Do you have any animals that you can come bring down to us the next morning? And they were there in the morning with 15 animals ready to go that were available for adoption, and all of them went home. But since then, yesterday, we reached out to a few more shelters in the area because we have way more foster homes than we need right now. We're talking about hundreds more than what we need. And people are literally waiting in line virtually to get an animal into their home. So we just reached out to a few shelters around the area, and we transferred in 8 dogs today who will hang out at our shelter tonight, and then tomorrow we will make sure their paperwork is all in order and observe how they behave, and then we'll send them into foster homes. So I think that no matter what that you guys are doing in your shelters, I think that even though everybody's exhausted, when you have such a large community response, I think it's really important to extend a helping hand, because we're all, one case away from devastation. And these are shelters that were in a space crunch. So we strategically picked them because they have a much smaller facility than us. So I'm excited to be able to help them and build that community in the Hampton Roads area.
That's great. Makena, what type of collaborations are you seeing out there in the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast regions?
Similarly what Michelle just said, we're seeing a lot of these Northern Virginia, DC organizations who, the one that comes to mind is Lost Dog and Cat Foundation out of Northern Virginia, Maryland, who reached out to us specifically and said, we need more pets. We have too many foster homes and not enough pets to fill them in this area. So we hooked them up with a number of rural communities that don't have the same type of resources, and also helped them up with a shelter in Tennessee. So what's been really cool is to see how many animals are still being transported in order to fill the need for the real work, that the real collaboration that's happening is the public. Like, it's been remarkable to see how much the public has really responded to the call for help from these shelters and from these organizations. And then, like what Michelle did, the fact that we have so many organizations pulling together at this time of crisis. Two things come to mind. One is down in Memphis, they have a coalition of organizations that have been working together for a very short time. And when all of this started happening, they would have daily check-ins and report, what supplies they have. And they sometimes would do supply swaps. If one organization was needing something, the other one didn't. They kept abreast on how many animals each one had, and if they could, fill the foster need for another organization if they had too many fosters. So the collaboration has been, I think, ongoing through this whole number of weeks. And down, I have to call out Orange County Animal Services, because they were working on how to organize people coming into their large facility so they were keeping within the 10 people guidelines. And so they were putting their staff or the public at risk. And so they took the Wait While program and started to modify it for all the different programs they felt like they needed appointments for. And they had the brilliant idea to make it a regional program and open it up to other facilities in Orange County, also OCL, I'm going to mispronounce it, I know I am, Osceola, and then and they've just started to help other organizations that didn't know how to do this appointment system. And they're doing appointments for field operations, adoptions, fosters, owner surrenders, the clinic, food pantry, and they then shared that resource out so other organizations knew how to handle the same situation.
That's fantastic. And for those of you all not familiar with Wait While is an app similar to what you would sign on to at your DMV to get in line and get into a ticketing system for that reservation system. So that's a really cool program that they're doing down in, and that's Orange County, Florida, I believe.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I should have said that.
Fine.
Yeah, so it's Orange County, Florida. And so one of the organizations had never done managed intake before, and they were having to do that. And so they worked with Orange County, Florida in order to come up with this system so they can implement that program. So a lot of really great life-saving programs are being worked through with this type of collaboration that's happening.
That's great. Bethany, what else are you seeing from a collaboration perspective?
Yeah, really just a lot of information sharing, that virtual collaboration. So, kind of one of the themes that's coming out of this entire experience is it really is a time like no other. Collaboration is required. It's not optional that we're not really working together as one industry right now. And information sharing is a great way. So when Kern County starts doing delivery services for their foster homes and they figure out a process, they can call and talk to Front Street and talk to other organizations and say, we tried this and it worked really well, or we tried it and here's something that we want to tweak. And so a lot of this information sharing, this kind of crowdsourcing of solutions and sharing new programmatic ideas is happening on Facebook. There's several Facebook pages that are really facilitating these national information sharing areas where groups can virtually collaborate with each other. And to the example that Makena just gave, the mentorship aspect that comes along with that for the group that's never run a foster program before, reaching out to a foster-based rescue group and connecting with them on just what are the ABCs, kind of what's Foster 101 and how do I get going here? And it's been really great to see that on a national level.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of those times where we're all in uncharted waters right now, and the more we can share information on what's successful, the better off we're all going to be. I'm going to dive in. I had a couple more questions. You know what? I'm going to ask this one more. This is the last one, then we'll get into the questions in the chat. Sue, really briefly, talk to us a little bit about how Best Friends is helping on the ground during the pandemic around our life-saving centers.
Yeah, sure. I'll definitely speak specifically to our life-saving centers because there's a lot of on-the-ground work that doesn't involve our life-saving centers, and I don't want that to go unnoticed. But it's our life-saving centers are each positioned in communities where our focus is helping the municipal shelters in that direct city that they're located in, as well as in some cases the surrounding county, or state, or even region. So for example, I'm sorry, my senior dog is taking this time to walk around, so you're going to hear a lot of background noise. I think this is the best audience that could happen in. She's got a little dementia. But so we're supporting our municipal organizations, and in some cases, those are really limited access right now, that they're only doing emergency intakes. But we are still open to intakes whenever we can. We are still taking in animals as long as there's the need, we have the ability to take them, and we can make it happen. And that depends a lot on the day-to-day situation on the ground in our life-saving centers. But one of the things we didn't want to do was let anything that was happening right now stop life-saving center if we stop life-saving if we had the opportunity to make it happen. So we have, in some cases, we've, for example, the state of Utah put an order out that we can no longer do non-urgent surgery procedures, which include spay and neuter. So up until the point we got that order, we still were providing services for our partners, our rescue partners, and we had already closed down to the public, but we kept that partner ability open because we knew that was getting hard for everyone. We do operate a food bank in our Salt Lake Center. Excuse me, that's pretty significant. Our community cat programs are still going in the places where we can get spay and neuter done. That window is closing kind of rapidly on that. So that is limited right now. We're essentially just doing what we can, keeping in mind that we want to keep life-saving going. We want to keep our staff and volunteers safe, and we want to stay within the requirements of the law and whatever orders are coming down around us. Still doing adoptions too.
That's great. So getting into some of the questions that are over on the Q&A section. In this one, I think this is a really good question because I've seen a lot of chatter about some of the rules and regulations, and we talked about the access to veterinary care right now is somewhat limited. And so the question, I'm going to send this to you, Sue, is Best Friends currently adopting out pets who are not spayed or neutered due to a lack of spay and neuter access?
Yes, we are, and we're doing that, and we saw that coming, so we did put a lot of thought into it. And as I mentioned, the key things for us that are really important are to keep life-saving going and to keep the staff safe. So for us, that still meant doing adoptions even when spay-neuter wasn't available. Some of the things that we thought about that helped us develop this perspective was that spay-neuter is a tool to no-kill. It is not the end and the be-all and end-all for no-kill. It's one of the tools that we use, and in this case, we know that this situation is not forever. We know it's one way that we can help support the frontline healthcare workers that are really doing incredibly brave work in the hospitals, working without PPE. We know we aren't in this alone. Utah put down the order that we couldn't do non-urgent services, but Ohio and other states and locales have put those orders in place as well. So we knew it wasn't like we were making just some willy-nilly decision without being in it with the rest of the community. And so we're doing adoptions. We're not doing foster to adopt, although NACA put out some really good guidelines around how to continue life-saving when spay-neuter wasn't available. They did include foster to adopt as well. But we actually decided to continue to conduct our adoptions because we really look to the positive. And we've seen our communities, both in this event and in other events, really step up to the plate if you see the outpouring of people who are showing up for foster animals. We know that every time we've reached out for help, we've received overwhelming support for things. So we're going to put our trust in our compassionate motivations of our community that they're going to follow through on spay neuter. We're making appointments in locations where we have that ability, so that we're going to have appointments on the books. In the situations where we can't, we've got an opportunity set up where they will be on a schedule to get a call back. And so we're just making sure that we're doing what we can. We've also really want to embrace the fact that inevitably there may not be an animal that returns for sterilization. And so we're just thinking about that in terms of perspective. The number of animals that we touch through our Lifesaving Center operations is a big number of animals, but compared to the communities, the states, and the regions in the country, it's a really small number of animals. So we know we're going to do our due diligence to try to prevent every animal that's not going to get spayed and neutered to get spayed and neutered. Like, we want to, anyone that's out there, we want to get that done as soon as this crisis ends. However, we know that if we set an example that life-saving has to stop because spay neuter isn't available, that will do more to increase killing in this country for people who think that without spay neuter they have to kill animals, or that life-saving has to stop. And so I would encourage everyone, if you've been battling with this, I know it's emotional and painful, and I know that it's probably causing people to lose sleep at night, especially this time of year heading into the spring. But we can catch up. There's some great resources on the Best Friends Network page, including a video of veterinarians that, if you're in shelters, you probably will recognize them really right away, talking about we will get through this. Dr. Julie Levy's on there. We're talking back to a time when spay neuter wasn't the norm for animal shelters, and we figured it out then, and we will come back. We're not going back to that period in time.
That's great, and I know it's definitely a controversial topic around. So next question up, and this is from Gina, and I'm including this in part because I think this is a great idea on the part of her organization, but a lot of places are doing emergency fostering. We are doing on-call emergency foster, building a pool to call on if we exceed capacity. This choice was due to concerns for our fosters being returned once people become sick or hospitalized, which I think is a great thing to have a game plan on there. What are others thinking regarding this being a real concern? Who wants to take that one? Don't you all jump in at once.
Oh, if someone else doesn't, I can, but I already talked a lot.
Makena, I saw you in there. Let's go.
Well, I know, so I don't know if I'm going to answer this question properly. I'll give it a try, but I know it's funny because Elizabeth Jensen and I were talking about this yesterday in regards to the biggest concern is in New York City, we're having owners starting to get sick and they don't have places for their pets to go and they don't want them to go to shelters. So trying to pull together a group of people who are willing to foster owned animals so they don't end up in the shelter system. I don't think I'm answering the question though. I think her question is more towards, do you all have backup fosters for those fosters that are needing to return pets? I think that is a very important problem to kind of be ready for. I think what we're seeing is more fosters are keeping the pets and adopting them or finding owners themselves through virtual meet and greets and interviewing people over the phone to adopt the fosters that they have. But I do think it's important to have those extra foster names to call on in those emergency situations. And in New York, I think it's an interesting problem that we will have to probably solve for, and probably not just New York, but a lot of these larger cities where we're seeing a lot of owners becoming ill that don't want to give their pets over to a shelter or an organization.
This is Bethany. I'll just jump in really quickly and add. So one thing that we've put out, and we've got a template for it so organizations can put their own logos and information on it, is the community kindness cards. And this is something that your organization can do proactively now to really, it's like neighbors engaging neighbors. So the concept behind it is, with the population that's currently healthy, you're asking your volunteers and your adopters and your fosters to reach out to their neighbors and be that proactive resource in the event someone in your neighborhood gets sick. So let's see if there's 5 neighbors that can help care for those pets while that individual is hospitalized. So just trying to get ahead of it as much as possible, and especially the parts of the country that aren't experiencing the high infection rates right now.
And we'll include that in the follow-up. We will include a link to some of those community rehoming resources so that you all can take a look on those. But that's a great one, Bethany. So I have a couple of questions in here regarding pet food banks and the fact that a lot of resources are in really short supply. I know there are a couple of national organizations that are working together with some of the national pet food brands to have pet food available. Is any of our panelists, do you know where we are in that process?
I can talk to that. There are national organizations that are working to set up food banks in key areas in the country, which includes some major metropolitan areas. If there is someone interested in operating a food bank that is based on donations in your community, and we are actually still doing that in our Salt Lake Center, and I've asked our Salt Lake Center to actually put together how we're handling those donations safely, so that we can give that out as an example for other people. If you're not able to access a major food provider for a donation at this time. And that includes, we've set up a drop-off box outdoors, and we're actually having staff just handle those materials minimally with personal protection equipment, washing their hands. And then we're actually having our food bank clients schedule appointments for picking up food rather than just having kind of a walk-in, which is what we had previously. And we're setting their food allotments outside for them to completely minimize person-to-person contact. So I hope that we can publish those soon on our network partner site. But there is some work nationally. The national work is probably going to reach some big major cities, and there are other humane societies and SPCAs that are larger and have more resources and access that are setting up food banks. But I think a key for most organizations out there, figuring out how to handle that safely is going to be your successful part, to accept them and to hand them out.
And that's a great time to tap into like your human food banks and see how they're responding in your community, and can you partner with them to resource share.
So next question, what are your recommendations for rescue organizations, non-shelters, in regards to the safe handling of animals taken in from the community as owner surrenders? Our goal is to alleviate the concerns of COVID-19 exposure for our fosters without putting burdensome protocols in place. Do you recommend bathing of all animals on intake at this point?
Hi, this is Michelle. I actually just found some really great resources on the American Pets Alive website, and they include intake procedures for whoever is intaking the animal, and also advice and downloadable pamphlets for fosters who are taking care of animals to hand off to adopters. So there are guidelines out there that exist already that will tell you exactly, down to the mixture of what you should be wiping animals down with if you're intaking them. I found that really helpful.
And one thing that I will also note, and this is something that I don't think that's even been published yet.
Yeah, thank you.
Good. Sue, you probably know more about this than I do, so go ahead and say that. Talk about it.
So there are some national, by national I mean federal, including the CDC organizations, that have been really taking a look at the science around handling animals And I like Brent, I know that I don't think that those have been published yet. I would not be surprised if they were published even while we were on this call. But there is going to be some new guidance released about that, because that is something that people are thinking about. They're trying to look at all of the science. I don't know exactly what it's going to say, but I did hear that they had removed bathing animals as a recommendation at this point. That doesn't still mean that it may help your staff feel safer to bathe an animal. Although if I was asking staff to bathe cats, they might not feel safer to be bathing every strange cat they just took in. So I think that there is going to be some new guidelines coming out about that soon, if not today. It's such a new disease, and it's such a new experience for us that they are still in the process of learning exactly how to keep people safe. I think the biggest thing, and the message I've been giving, is that you're no more likely to catch something from a dog or cat as a foam light, as a ballpoint pen or a clipboard that you're using to sign surrender paperwork. So thinking about protecting yourself as a person at all times, that includes washing your hands if you or using personal protection equipment. If you're wearing clothing, making sure you're taking that clothing off and washing it in the same way. If you were working in a parvo ward with a puppy and with puppies that were sick, and you'd want to change your clothes before handling other animals, you'd want to change your clothes and be careful and protective of yourself as much as possible, no matter what you're handling, dog or pen.
That's great. Next question, and I think I'm going to send this to you, Bethany. Many large organizations are still doing multi-state site transports. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so there are absolutely lots of organizations still doing transport. Best Friends is an example of that. Some of our transport programs are continuing. Some of them have made modifications to decrease volume. I think the most important thing to know is that you can continue transport. It is still an essential life-saving service, but you need to think about it in light, first and foremost, of protecting the humans that are involved in that process. We just published, I believe we just published Best Friends working document on this. So it's our internal SOP. We're sharing it out with the masses as an example. And what we did in that document was bring in guidance from the CDC and think about what can we do to make sure our staff and volunteers that are doing these transports are being thoughtful and safe in how they're moving themselves and animals, potentially cross country, certainly cross state in several locations. So be thoughtful of that. One thing that we're doing is monitoring the CDC site. There are some level 3 locations that have been flagged. So you kind of think about transport differently in those locations. We've had volunteers that have legitimate concerns about if I go on a transport, what happens if a shelter-in-place order is issued. Best Friends, our advocacy team, has created, as a side note, some great resources on that. I think we have at least 29 states now that have some sort of language around shelter in place. That does not mean in all cases that transport can't keep happening. I'm in Illinois, and that's a great example. We were the 3rd state to have shelter in place, but we are absolutely still accepting animals from other parts of the country. And that's the basic health cert that we'd require at any other time. So making sure that you're protecting people, that you're following the orders and mandates on the state levels, not only where you're starting, where you're finishing in the states that you're going through. And one thing we're personally doing as an organization is we're making sure that the staff and volunteers participating in this transport are comfortable doing it. We're asking that first and foremost. To Sue's point, we never want to put an individual in a situation where they don't feel safe. And so we'll repurpose people that don't want to participate in transport into other roles and then bring different people in.
That's great. In the essence of time, I did want to keep this to not more than an hour for everyone. I know there are a few questions over in the questions category, but there's also a lot of great comments and discussions going back and forth of other people that are sharing some of their ideas. And so I appreciate you all. If you get a chance to go over and read some of those, I think you'll get some great ideas over on that in the Q&A section of this. And then we will also follow up with a copy of this presentation with a link to the resources. And then, as I mentioned before, I know there are a handful of questions over there that we still didn't get a chance to get to, and we will follow up with those as well. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Sue, Makena, Bethany, Michelle, thank you so much for your time and expertise today. And sharing out what you all have been seeing over the last couple of weeks as we all kind of navigate through this together. I appreciate it so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Brent.
Thanks.
Thanks.